In June, amid the golden fields, I saw Groundhog lying dead. Dead lay he, my senses shook, and mind outshot our naked frailty. There, lowly in the vigorous summer, his form began its senseless change, and made my senses waver dim. Seeing nature ferocious in him, inspecting those close maggots' might, and seeing cauldron of his being, half with loathing, half with strange love, I poked him with an angry stick. The fever arose, became a flame, and vigor circumscribed the skies. Immense energy in the sun, and through my frame a senseless trembling. My stick had gone not good nor harm. Then stood I silent in the day, watching the object as before, and kept my reverence for knowledge, trying to control, to be still, to quell the passion of the blonde, until I had bent down on my knees, praying for the joy in the sight of decay. And so I left and returned.
I don't know what makes you in these photographs. I stare at these
In autumn, strict of eye, to see the sap gone out of the groundhog, but the bony, sodden hulk remained. But the year had lost its meaning and its intellectual chains. I have lost love and loathing, mirrored up in the wall of wisdom.
And just staring back, deep sleep, aviations, in conversations with constellations.
Another summer took the fields again, massive and burning, full of life. But when I chanced upon the spot, there was only a little hair left, and bones bleaching in the sunlight, beautiful as architecture. I watched them like a geometer, and cut a walking stick from a birch. It has been 3 years now. There is no sign of the groundhog. I stood there in the whirling summer. My hands capped a withering heart, and thought of China and of Greece, of Alexander in his tent, and Montaigne in his tower, of Saint Teresa in her wild lament.
So the title of this poem is The Groundhog. It doesn't tell us a whole lot other than it's probably about a groundhog. So, groundhogs, I mean, we can draw some hypotheses from that. Groundhog is like the animal that brings on spring, etc. So it may have something to do with season changes. So let us go to the next step. P stands for paraphrase. So basically the whole poem is the narrator going to the spot in the woods and finding a decaying groundhog on the ground over the course of a year. And the first time he sees it, he's sort of disgusted by it because there's maggots and things around it. But by the end, when it's almost completely decayed, he sort of accepts that the groundhog's death is a natural part of the circle of life. So, figurative language. Throughout the poem, there's a lot of metaphors, so we'll start with just going down. So here, inspecting close his maggot's might and seething cauldron of his being. So, the gopher's body is described as a cauldron of his being. So, like, you get this. You're starting to get some imagery of like fire and like burning things, even though the groundhog's dead. And then I poked him with an angry stick. That's personification, because obviously a stick doesn't have feelings. The fever rose, became a flame. So this is a description of both the maggots seething around the body, but also the feeling inside of the narrator as he's like growing in disgust and anger at the sight of a dead groundhog. So further down, trying for control to be still, to quell the passion of the blood, that's personification, because even though it's describing his emotions, blood, obviously you can't have feelings. And in intellectual chains, I lost both love and loathing. Intellectual chains are a metaphor for the knowledge he gains and the wisdom he learns from seeing this dead body decay. You meet up in the wall of wisdom, again, a metaphor. And then he describes the bones as beautiful as architecture, and he watched them like a geometer. These are both similes. This first one describing how he now sees the beauty of death. And at the end, he says that he thinks of China and of Greece and other historical figures. So these are all allusions to history, as he thinks of all the things that have passed. So the attitude of the poem, actually, it probably makes more sense to do shift first. So the shift in the poem sort of happens around here, because this is where afterward he returns to see the groundhog after seeing it initially up here, and he comes back with a changed mindset where he describes his intellectual chains and the wall of wisdom where he learns to accept death. But up here, when he first sees it, the attitude is mostly of disgust and anger, since he doesn't want to accept his own mortality like that of the groundhog. And then down here, the attitude is more accepting and sort of weary, as he seems to have gotten, even though not much time has passed, he's gotten older and more mature, and he's now accepting of his own eventual death. So then we go back to title as the second to last T. The groundhog, it still just means the animal that he saw decay, but it's the season change, although it's not directly linked to the poem, it does matter, and it's firstly, the narrator visited the groundhog throughout different seasons, but also that it sort of represents this. The changing of the seasons is sort of like the cycle of life. So life, like the narrator has it, and then death and decay afterward. So last we have theme. So the theme seems to be in this poem that one should accept death as a natural part of the cycle of life. However, it also seems to say that accepting death is part of growing up to be an adult, and it comes with like a loss of innocence and some of your happiness, because the narrator, after accepting death, he talks about losing both love and loathing. So although he's not as angry and childish about seeing things like death, he's also not very happy about other things. So the poem's about growing up, it's about changing time, and it's about accepting death. Pretty good.